For many trainers who have played through Pokémon Legends Arceus, there's one prized catch that stands on its own apart from the others. That makes 3 ghosts. Yo! Shiny Alpha Pokémon. Alphas are prized for quite literally being a cut above fellow Pokémon. They have increased stats and access to moves that normally require a move tutor, and when transferred to Scarlet and Violet, these peak specimens will always have the unique Alpha mark and are guaranteed to receive the Jumbo mark in Mesagoza for being the largest of their species, making them far and away the easiest way to get a Pokémon with the maximum number of marks. There are 3 main ways to encounter Alpha Pokémon. Once you've defeated Lord Cleavor, many spawners around Hisui will now have a very low chance to spawn Alphas. The chance varies from spawner to spawner, but on Serebii you can find a map that lists each point and what it can potentially have. It is possible to soft reset these spawners if a massive mass outbreak spawns on top of them, and then is cleared out. You can save and reset to spawn new Pokémon, potentially spawning Alpha Pokémon as well. Given that the chance for random Alphas rarely breaks 1%, it may not be worth it unless you want to specifically find an Alpha below level 70 to get the Footprint Ribbon in Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. More reliably, dotted throughout the Hisui region are what are known as static Alphas. Every time you enter a map, these Alphas will always spawn at specific spots and will always spawn at the same level each time. If you're looking for an Alpha of one of these specific species, they're relatively easy to hunt, as you can get a new one each time you return to Jubilee Village and re-enter the map. For an even more specific subset of these static Alphas, you can even forego having to leave the map by using the same method of soft resetting their spawn point as with random Alphas. If an Alpha Pokémon spawn is blocked by a massive mass outbreak on top of it, by clearing the outbreak you can have a very quick soft reset hunt on your hands for a select few static Alpha Pokémon. But massive mass outbreaks aren't just good for making soft reset points around the map. They also hold the key to getting almost any shiny Alpha Pokémon you could want in Hisui with a little luck, patience, and legwork. Massive mass outbreaks will begin to spawn once you've completed the post-game request Daybreak, and vary in size depending on a few factors. The first part of a massive mass outbreak will have 8 to 10 Pokémon of the indicated species or its evolutions, and in 76.5% of massive mass outbreaks that's all you'll see. 12% of the time, once you clear an outbreak, a second wave of Pokémon will spawn, indicated by a message a new horde seems to have formed. This will always happen on outbreaks that are marked with a yellow star icon that spawn 3% of the time, and will never happen on outbreaks marked with a berry which spawn 8.5% of the time. These second waves are crucial to finding shiny Alpha Pokémon via massive mass outbreaks. In 81% of second waves you'll find an evolved version of the Pokémon from the first wave, but 10% of the time it'll spawn a wave of nothing but Alpha Pokémon from the first wave, and a further 9% of the time you'll find evolved Alphas if applicable. A second wave contains either 6 or 7 Pokémon, and once you've caught them the outbreak will finally disperse. Seems rather anticlimactic for this seemingly ultra-powerful Alpha shiny hunting method, but that's because there are more Alphas hiding in the outbreak than just those ones. When you enter an area in Legends Arceus, the game has already generated all the overworld Pokémon that it can, and the same is true for Pokémon in a massive mass outbreak to an extent. Each massive mass outbreak will have 4 Pokémon that spawn when you first arrive. These 4 were locked in when you entered the map, but something very interesting happens if you save the game before catching them and then go back and start battling them instead. If you KO them in multi-battles rather than catch them, the other Pokémon in the massive mass outbreak will start to change in subtle ways. Maybe a level up or down on this spawn, a flip gender on this next one, and some spawns will even end up spawning as evolved Pokémon where they didn't before. This is because the game's RNG is rolling slightly differently depending on how you take out the first wave of Pokémon in a massive mass outbreak, and this causes the upcoming spawns to shake out differently as well, allowing you to see hundreds of different spawns within the same massive mass outbreak. This is what's known as the permutation method. To start hunting with this method, you'll need to find an outbreak with a second wave that you want to catch. This can sometimes be the hardest part of this method, as getting a specific massive mass outbreak can be a little tricky, especially if you want specific Alpha Pokémon in the second wave. Once you've scouted out your outbreak, count how many Pokémon it has in the first wave, and then consult this table. This table is from a website which I'll link in the description that's a checklist of all the possible ways you could clear the first wave of the outbreak. Working from left to right, when you see a cell labeled C, that means catch a Pokémon or engage it in a 1v1 battle. When you see a group of cells of the same color labeled KO, start a multi-battle with that many wild Pokémon. It doesn't matter if you catch or defeat the Pokémon during the battle, but KOing them is likely the faster option. To give you an example, here's a permutation I did with my Hisuian Sneasel outbreak.
around the table. It took 5 minutes.
Nice.
On Rotom now. Okay.
Once you've worked your way to the end of a row, the next wave will spawn, and if you see all the Pokemon in the second wave without finding your target, check off that row, reset the game, and go again from the next row. A big problem players run into with this method is what to do about Pokemon that are too timid to engage in multi-battles. This group contains Pokemon like White Stripe Basculin, Rowlet, and baby Pokemon like Togepi. While it was first thought impossible to despawn these species as a group, it turns out there's a way. Similar to how you can hit a Pokemon with berries or bait to make it angry and engage in battle, you can hit a timid Pokemon with an item to send it into a panicked state, where it'll run for a little while before deciding whether to despawn. If a player leaves the area while a Pokemon is panicking, they'll skip straight to despawning. This means that if you hit multiple timid Pokemon in quick succession to get them to simultaneously panic, you can despawn them as a group by fast traveling away from the outbreak, just like how they would if you defeated them in a multi-battle. Now this method isn't guaranteed to get you the shiny alpha you're looking for, but if you manage to get all the way through the table without seeing your target in the second wave, there is still hope. But I only recommend it if you're truly desperate to not have to find another outbreak. If you toggle this advanced mode switch at the top of the table, you'll see a new set of permutations with cells labeled L. These leave cells work by leveraging a strange quirk of the outbreaks. When the player leaves the area, the outbreak will attempt to respawn its Pokemon so it has 4 again. The trick is that if the outbreak doesn't have enough spawns remaining to have 4 Pokemon, the RNG for those Pokemon will still be rolled, which then affects the spawns in the second wave. This can get a bit tedious though, with lots of permutations on the table requiring you to leave the area upwards of 3 times. But mixing in these extra permutations means that for an outbreak with only 8 Pokemon in the first wave, you go from 25 permutations and seeing at least 150 alphas, to 152 permutations that show you at least 912. And with the high base shiny rate for massive mass outbreaks, this is an incredibly powerful method for seeing a ton of alphas and finding some incredibly unique shinies. Finally, I should mention that there are a few exceptions. Any Hisui Pokemon that can't spawn in a massive mass outbreak or evolve from a Pokemon that does are impossible to use this method on. Notably, this means that the space-time distortion exclusive spawns are unfortunately off the table, as well as some unique Pokemon like Alolan Vulpix and Ninetales. There's also one less obvious exception, which is Magikarp, because in order to do permutations you need to be able to despawn the wild Pokemon as a group, and unless you get extremely lucky by having multiple random alphas in your first wave, Magikarp will absolutely refuse to despawn together. They won't engage in multi-battles and don't have any reaction to being hit by items. Luckily, this is the only Pokemon species that I know of that acts this way, and there's a static alpha Magikarp in the Obsidian Fieldlands if you truly want an alpha Magikarp. I hope that this permutation tutorial helps you find the shiny alpha Pokemon you've always wanted, and thanks for watching.